All right, so welcome to the Sparked HL7 AU eRequesting Technical Design Group meeting for Thursday the 1st of August. We have a few things to get through today because this is the last meeting before the ballot for comment. So we've got a number of things we're going to cover. We've got the usual approval of minutes. Then Michael's going to give us a bit of an update on the progress where we're at and talk about the proposed AUeReqDI mappings to AUeRequesting. And then Brett is going to talk about RESTful interactions. Finally, we have an eRequesting IG walkthrough. I'm not sure who's presenting that, but somebody must be. All right, so small bit of business to get going. Earlier today, I sent you the minutes for last week's meeting. This is the 23rd of the 7th, in which we mostly covered system obligations. So the recording of all of those decisions that were made is at the bottom there. Quite a few decisions. Good work. Is there anyone who would like to motion to approve those minutes?
I'm happy to do that, Daniel.
Thanks, Daniel. And do we have a second, please?
I'll second, Chris.
Thank you. All right. Okay, I've launched a poll for the approval of minutes for the previous meeting. Please follow the instructions on your screen. All right, we'll close that one off in 3, 2, 1. And those ones are approved. 24 voted affirmative and 11 abstained. Thanks very much. All right. Michael, are you ready?
Yep, I'm good.
Awesome. Handing over to you.
Okay, so just giving a couple of updates first. So we've got the AUeRequesting ballot for comment coming up, and the ballot sign up is currently open until midnight on the 5th. So just need to make sure that you are signed up before that closes on the 5th. You need to be a current HL7 member in order to do that, and you won't be able to sign up after that closes. So just making sure that you get that in by midnight on the 5th, Australian Eastern Standard Time. Then the ballot period will run from the 12th of August through till the 8th of September, and then we'll move into reconciliation for the month after that. So might jump to the next slide. So that's our current registration so far. So this is as of this morning. So we've had 51 voters registered, and we've got 11 individuals and 17 organizations. So it's looking pretty good. And next thing coming up is we've got our hybrid working group meeting. So that'll be in Brisbane on the 20th, but it will also be a hybrid event. There's 2 eRequesting sessions during that day that we're going to have, as well as there's an AU core work group and the AU fire work group as well. So that's a open work group day. And then we've got the Connectathon on the 21st, 22nd of August in Brisbane as well. So the days after that. Just jumping to the next slide. So for that, there's still some places available for the AU work group day. So if you want one of those, grab one. There's only a few left. But the Connectathon is sold out at this stage. So if you do want to attend, though, you can go on the wait list by sending an email to events@hl7.com.au, but it is sold out, so you won't be able to register through the Eventbrite. You'll have to just go on the wait list for that. And for the Connectathon, we've got if you are already registered to come to the Connectathon, we're going to have an AUeRequesting track kickoff, which is 11 AM next Friday. And there's a Zoom link there for that. So if you're registered to come along, you can come to that meeting. Now, progress update. So where are we? So this is our last meeting to get any decisions made before we take the ballot for comment snapshot, which will be on Monday. So the leftover from our last meetings on system obligations, we've got through placer obligations, filler obligations, server obligations, and patient access ones. And we're now looking at the RESTful interaction. So we started that in the last meeting, and we're going to finish that off today, as well as any other issues we need to address today, and an IG walkthrough. So that's where we're at. All right, moving on to the AUeReqDI mappings, the eRequesting. So this proposal briefly went through in the last meeting and sent out an email to everyone with a link to this proposal on that Confluence page. And we're inviting feedback for that. So we didn't really get any feedback, so I'm taking that as positive. Heath did raise a few comments on here about proposed mappings and the like, but he has a comment down the bottom saying that none of it needs to be changed for this publication. If you just scroll to the bottom, there's here. So basically, Heath's comments have said the content is good for publishing for ballot comment. He was commenting on the context of future TDG discussions. So I think that they're good comments. They're useful for us when we move forward with this. And the whole point of this is this would go in the IG for the ballot for comment. So there's still ample opportunity to provide comment on this if there are any issues. But given we didn't get any other feedback, I'm assuming that it's all good. So I would like to make the proposal that we accept these AUeReqDI mappings into AUeRequesting as published on this page for inclusion in the IG for the ballot for comment.
We had a hand up from Andy. Andy, did you?
Sorry, Andy, yep.
One of my comments on the AUeRequesting was around the providing more context for the data elements in terms of their definitions and uses. And that, I think, makes it difficult to understand whether the intent of the data element is actually carried through in its representation or the mapping that we accept in an IG. But I don't know where that, and maybe my fault, I don't know whether anything was done about enhancing that information within the AUeRequesting.DI.
Yeah, so that feedback that was provided is being gone through now. So there is intent that that will be gone through and feedback will be provided on all of those responses to that. So that's still in progress at the moment. And I suspect then when we get that feedback, it may affect this, and we can come back around to that, and that's where we can raise ballot for comment issues on this as well, saying that we had intended to map it here, it's now no longer appropriate or like, but we don't have any of that on yet. So it's highly likely we'll have to revisit this as any of those issues are re-clarified. But the intent here is that hopefully this is these are the decisions we've made to date, and I think that's the intent here, is to get that into the ballot for comment, so that we can seek further comment on it from here.
Thanks, Michael. Would you just like to restate the motion you're moving?
Yep. So I propose that we accept the AUeReqDI mappings into AUeRequesting as published on this page for inclusion in the AUeRequesting IG.
Would anyone like to second that motion?
Can I just make a friendly amendment just to note that that is into the IG for the ballot for comment.
Correct. Yes.
I'm happy to take it to a vote, but we need someone to second it first.
I'll second Chris.
Thanks. All right, great. So you should get a poll coming up on your screen now to vote for the motion that Michael has put forward. Can leave that open for another minute or so. If you haven't voted, please take a look at the poll now. All right, and we'll be closing that one off in 3, 2, 1. And that one looks like it's passed. We have 28 of 55 affirmative, 1 negative, and 17 abstained.
Great. Thank you.
Thank you. We're moving on to Wave 4 system obligations integrations now. Is this Brett?
Yep.
Brilliant.
Can
Handing
you,
over to you.
cool, excellent. Cool. So we're returning to our discussion on our interactions discussion. So just to place this again, where here's our actors and how they relate to each other. I might go on, Chris. Thank you. And again, we're going through these as RESTful interactions, so we can flesh out what's going in our capability statement. Yeah, so based on, I might go on to the next slide. Yeah, so with the previous discussion about the filler interactions, we had some difficulties, let's say, in terms of like saying interactions. Had some difficulties whether some of the proposed fire interactions were actually needed for service request for fillers, because there was this consideration that task would be introduced at some point, so a profile on task, and task would be introduced into the mix, which would give us access to service request via the task reference. So I think, so basically just to frame this question, and I think this is a good point to probably have this something around this decided, at least for the ballot content. So we have essentially the service request concept, which is a definition of a plan and proposal of procedure or observation report or study. So I've pinched this from the fire spec. So that's really the definition of what is being requested, and then we have a task that's indicating that you actually plan to action that request, and there's a status attached to that in terms of the fulfillment activity around that request. So task does reference the actual request detail, and that's how from a task that is logged, the service request detail can be obtained. So in some ways, if there are tasks in the system, one way to get access to service request is via that task, and the question is probably, is that the only way that you'll get access to a service request to be for a filler? So I think that boils down to a question of do we ever, not so much ever, but at this point, do we want to support the access to service request fulfillers without there being an associated task. And that probably boils down to the question: will there always be a task that can be used to access the request fulfillers, or do we have? Should we allow other ways to obtain service requests through searching and other mechanisms? So I might throw to the people that care. Angus, I knew you'd be one of those. He cares a lot.
So yeah, it's a difficult conversation. So I feel if we are just going to throw service requests around, then there's a whole lot of stuff that we're then not able to do, which I think we envision to do. And I guess to me, it kind of ends up being like what we do today with V2 messages, right? Like if all you have is a service request, then really all you can do is throw it at someone and say, please do that, hope you will. You know, like, and which is like V2 messaging with orders today, right? We send orders from doctor to Sonic or from doctor to Helios, from point A to point B, and that's the end of the transaction. And therefore, if the patient goes to a different, the order goes to Helios and the patient rolls at Sonic, we can't get the order because Helios isn't just going to then route it to us. But I mean, that is how it operates today. And the other thing is there's no status updates going back, right? So there's the order just comes in and you just consume it. Go, yes, I have the order. You don't then say, yes, I will do the order. Yes, the patient has arrived. Yes, we've collected. Yes, we've done the order. Yes, it's finished, right? Yeah. Because that's all task, right? So if we're going to entertain not having a task, it sort of, in my view, drops back down to that paradigm where all you can really do now is create a service request, direct it to someone, and send it to them. Job done. Yep. I think we were hoping, and I'm not dismissing, maybe that's a forked use case. Like I don't want to say that no one's allowed to do that, but it's not. I guess it's not the goal I thought we were trying to achieve. And I'd like to think we're introducing tasks so that service requests are somewhat agnostic to who does them. The task is the thing that says who does them. It's the fulfillment, as Andy will say. So we create a service request. It's not necessarily being directed at anyone. You can put in the service request that we intend this to be done by this performer, but it doesn't have to be done by that performer because the task is the thing that then sits there and is either directed to someone that says, this lab will do that task. And then another lab can say, yeah, but the patient's arrived here. So I want to claim that task or cancel that task, create a new task for me because the patient's here. And now that task is pointing to that service request and they do it. So there's a whole lot of extra dynamics we get by having tasks, which allow tasks to be transferred between fillers where required, and also for status updates going back to the placer to say, hey, we've got your task, the patient's arrived, it's collected, we've finished it, it's now done. So I guess that's all I'd say at this stage.
Yeah, I think that's good framing. Paul, I had you next.
Yeah, thanks, Brett. I just want to throw my support there behind Angus's. I think there's huge power in the tasks. If I think about our experience with doing e-referrals in the state health departments at the moment, we have tried to do this just using the service request by itself. And that actually causes some real confusion actually with the fulfillment status as well, because there is a difference between, those where the task for fulfillment is actually out in its workflow compared to the overall status of the service request as well. So not having a separate task or not mandating that there has to be a separate task to track that fulfillment, I think leaves us with similar problems that we have now in the HL7 v2 world. So very much agree with Angus's take on this. Yep.
Yep, that's good. I had Roma.
So I think tasks are super useful. In the HL7 v2 world, a lot of requesting is really weird because you don't actually know what's going on because you don't have a task analog. So I think tasks are really important and we shouldn't drop them or anything like that. But I do think there are cases where we do care about service requests without the task, and that's not if you're a pathology lab. That's maybe you're a decision support system, or maybe you're doing research and what you care about is, has a clinician thought that this patient requires an INR? I don't actually care what the INR result is. What I care about is that, you know, a clinician referred this person for an INR, and given the other factors, I think that, you know, that means that this patient's at risk of XYZ. And so there are times, say with guidance on detection of clinical conditions, where the referral matters, but the actual task of doing the test is irrelevant. I mean, it's relevant to the patient, but it's not to that one moment of deciding as to whether you should suggest an additional test. You know, like if you're doing should you do a test for diabetes type 1 in a child? Well, if you're referring them for a type 2 test and they've got other specific conditions and signs, then you may actually want to say, consider a diabetes type 1 test as well, irrespective of the result of the other test you've put them in for.
Cool. Yeah. And yeah, I think hearing that, I think you're right. There's definitely other cases, but I also take Andy's comment there in that if we're just thinking about fillers, I think it doesn't mean you can't do all those things, I think is what we're saying, but we wouldn't be doing it as a filler actor necessarily, right? So I think you'd probably have another concept in play in terms of getting access to that information for other reasons. Yeah, just to frame that. Barty?
Hi, yeah, I'll just do what Paul already said. He raised up that point that the task is important to indicate what's the status or where a particular service request is in terms of the fulfillment. Because the status is that service request supports and file, they are very limited and obviously very specific to what it is about the request and not the fulfillment. And in hospital perspective, it's important to indicate what's the status at this time. Like, you know, has it been sent out or has it started? So just to press on that, the task is important.
Yeah, cool.
Yeah.
And thanks, buddy. Angus, back to you. Oh, you're on mute.
Hey, I just wanted to talk about something that's in the chat now. Someone had stated that by having task, so they're looking at sort of transforming down the fire stuff to V2 to sort of marry into what labs do today, receiving V2 orders, right? And it's what we're doing at Sonic with the fire stuff we have. We've got a facade around V2 stuff.
Yeah.
And they're making the point that, you know, how do you put the task stuff into the V2 message to send to the lab, right? And I just want to put that on the table that's very challenging. That's hard. Like, we're not trying to you know, our boundary here isn't it must work with V2 or it must, you know, that we're just reinventing V2. Look, we have a facade layer, right? So we have to deal with the task. We have to remember what task IDs this order was related to, because we have to go back and update that task status to say it's in lab complete. So I just want it to be open and clear that it's correct. You can't just take this, convert it into a V2 message easily and just make the whole thing, you know, you're going to have a layer, whether it's your laboratory system or a layer in front of your laboratory system, that now is going to have to somewhat change and understand that this order has a task, and it needs to remember the task ID, and you're going to have like V2 messages coming back the other way with status updates. They're going to have to pick up what is the task ID to update that task. So just want to highlight that, yes, that in my view, that's where we're going. We're not trying, this isn't just going to seamlessly be a stateless converter from Fire to V2. Somewhere state has to be kept, whether that's in the laboratory system or a layer before it. But you're going to have to remember extra metadata about Fire that really doesn't fit into V2.
Yeah. I think that's good advice. Yeah, you're much more hooked into this actual Liz, aren't you? And yeah.
No, just jump in there really quickly.
Yeah, go on.
Sorry, Andy. Just on that point, Angus, are you essentially, like, the way you're dealing with it, are you essentially flattening a lot of those, the V2 fulfillment task stages down into very simple sort of, like an interim result type status in your V2 messaging? Like, is that kind of how you're dealing with it?
Yeah, so we're very much taking we have a facade layer that sits in the middle, right, with an SQL database underneath it, and it's talking Fire, and it's then converting that to V2 and then just pushing it into our existing V2 inbound interfaces. And then we also have V2 feeds coming back out, which going to that Fire layer again. And that's coming back out with sort of statuses like, it's received, it's collected, final. Yeah. And then we're translating that back, picking up the task IDs we stored in the SQL database in the interim layer and updating the task statuses appropriately. So we're doing this sort of transform with V2 going in, V2 coming back out, and mediating between.
But you're essentially simplifying those stages, the more broken up stages in the fulfillment task workflow back into simple V2 statuses.
So we're still using the Fire task state machine.
Yeah.
Like we're respecting that, but I will admit that we skip a few stages. It's just because, and this is a Sonicism, just because it was difficult we don't have all those statuses, but if you look at the state machine, it's not like you must do every state. It's you just must do them in this order, right?
Yeah.
So we struggled to get the difference between collected and in lab, but in the end we went, well, the doctor doesn't really care between the two. He just wants to know that the lab is doing the work, right? So we kind of collapsed the two into like with lab.
It's been accepted and they're actually actioning it.
Yeah. And that translates into task, because you also have business status, right? Which is open for us to define. We can call whatever statuses you like, right? There's the state machine for task, which is concrete. And then there's a sort of sub status, which is more human friendly or business specific, right?
I think that is the short answer for us all. If we want to do that sort of conversion at the moment, we are going to have to deal with that loss of fidelity.
I'd like to think we get to a place where the task state machine is a concrete thing we can't change, but the business statuses are open for us to define. And I don't know whether we do define them, but I'd like to think we get to a point where we do define a set of pathology statuses and a set of radiology statuses. Yeah. And that's not to say that every system must do every status. It just means there's a sort of sequential order. You can't really go backwards, but you can jump going forward.
Yeah, exactly. And it feels like there, Angus, we could provide some guidance around what those standard sort of V2 statuses would map to the equivalent in the Fire state machines.
Yeah, I get what you mean.
As guidance.
It's difficult with the OURC5, SC, and all those status. Yeah, and to look we've very much seen that at Sonic is like sort of our back end concern. So we know that, and I'm going to get this wrong, but an SC coming out, we know that means it's at the lab. Like it's really just between my Fire layer and the lab that we need to know what statuses in those V2 mean what. We can even like fudge it in V2 and just put in like, our own custom status just between our two layers in order to meet that Fire requirement of status going back the other way.
Yeah. All right. Well, we've hijacked it a little bit there.
That's good. No, that's good. I think it's. I think it's some good context because at the end of the day, you've got a nice standardized set of concepts in the Fire layer that people can hang other things off. And I think what you're talking about is like getting to another level of sophistication and capability. So it's that's nice. Andy, did you want to say? your bit?
No.
Okay, thanks. Yeah,
And
so I'm hearing a lot of support there for the, the task will be like a primary mechanism, and we should be really considering that. So I might go on to the next slide just to move this along. So, so I'm going to propose, this was the original set of interactions that we had slated to talk about, which includes searching for service request for the filler. I'm really hearing people mostly think that task and essentially a direct reference to the service request will be the main mechanism for fillers that gain, retrieve the service request details, and fillers aren't really interested in this interaction. So could I just throw that out there and say maybe we should just leave this and not include it at this point? So not include search capability around service requests, and the next slide is more about what we have talked about, which is having a read capability of being able to read a specific service request, which we assume will come via a task reference. But in the absence of having a task definition, it would mean that we would expect servers to essentially use this read mechanism to be able to get access to a specific service request. Actually, we might do this one first, because I think this one was less of a question. So what I've got done here is on the server, we haven't got a read service request interaction defined. We only did search. So I think the proposal here would be to say eRequesting server should have a read service request interaction defined, and also that the filler would have that as a shell read capability as well. So I would like to move, I would like to move this, which is that we'll accept that there's a read capability on the server and a read, a shell read on the client for filler.
I'll second it.
All right, we'll go to a vote on that one. As soon as I can get it to do it again. All right, there we go. Okay, so you're voting for the motion that there is a shall read capability on the server for a service request, and that the filler shall support that. So if you've vagued off and have gone and got yourself a coffee or are looking at Facebook, just come back to your screen now and vote on that one.
Are we voting on the prelim text on this slide as well? If we expect tasks references to service will be used to, are we just voting on the last 2 points?
Yeah, we're
voting on the whole slide?
We're voting on the proposed interaction.
All right, got a good result on that one. We'll close that one off in 3, 2, 1. And that one has been passed. 36 for, 1 negative, 14 abstained. Thank you very much.
Cool. So if we do go, can we go back actually? I'll go back and one more, please, Chris. Yeah. So I just wanted to cover this off and say, okay, this was a proposed search capability which was not agreed to as a requirement on the filler, which will support search. So I'm hearing that there is, mainly from fillers, that there's little interest in actually having this in a set of requirements for eRequesting at this stage, at least. So can I just open that for input, Michael?
I'm just wondering if they're two separate conversations there, because the ID would be equivalent to the read, just allowing you to do the include. But the requisition is more of a pull it out by that. I'm just wondering if they're separate things where you potentially do want the search by ID so that you can do an include, and it's equivalent to the read.
Yeah, that's a good point. Angus?
I guess my take on this, and it's what you've sort of said, and I'm probably just going to reiterate it, is I see that a filler, a lab, a radiology clinic comes at the service request via the task. So it's kind of what Brett's trying to say is that it's not actually the service request directly that I'll use to get the service request. What will happen is I will have a task assigned to me, and then I will search on the task by saying, give me this task that's assigned to me and include the service request that's referenced by the task. And that's how I get the service request. And that's why I have less interest in these. I'm not saying it shouldn't allow me to just get it directly, but it allows you to sort of corral that I'm allowed to get service requests that I have been tasked to do, rather than I am allowed to just get any old service request I think I can find. And that's kind of how I look at it. Is I get service requests by coming from a task assigned to me, not just by directly going to them. And that's why we haven't got a whole lot of rich searching on service requests for fillers.
Yeah, so I guess the question is, do you need that support for search by _ID with includes?
I personally only see I need it in a more troubleshooty way. Like, it's really useful. Okay. It's really useful as an integrator to go, oh, something's screwed up. I need to go look at that service request. But then I don't know if that's, now I don't know if that's part of, is that something we're trying to define? Or do I now have to always go through tasks just to look at a service request, even when troubleshooting?
Yeah, well, I don't think so, but like, your ability to do that is not curtailed by this spec. Okay, so you can definitely have that available to you as a being able in a different role, basically, is being able to troubleshoot that. Cool. Thanks, I guess, David.
Quick question. I may have missed a trick. Are we transmitting the task identifier via the patient, so via a form or a QR code or something, or are we transmitting the request identifier? Would you ever have a task identifier independently of that request?
So that's probably a big ticket question.
In the case of an unassigned request.
I see the task, the requisition as stated here, requisition identifier. I see that being the barcode, the token, the thing the patient has. And yes, it will be recorded on service requests, but it will also be recorded on the task. So the task, what is called group identifier, will be the same as the requisition and will be a token that the patient has. So effectively, the patient carries around a token to a task, and then that task is to the service request.
But that assignment is not directly supported. I don't know how it would be directly supported by interactions on service request or task. It would actually, I mean, the way I think we'll look at it is a special operation that is outside of this.
Yeah, I think that's a bigger question about where those come from in so many ways. Yeah.
Just trying to complete the circle here and making sure that we're still supporting those three use cases.
Yeah. So the transfer happens because the patient has a barcode, and that barcode leads to a task. And if they roll up at a lab that the task wasn't originally signed to, they call an operation that moves that task, like looks up that task by the barcode, cancels that task, creates a new task with the same barcode on it, and assigns it to the new provider they've arrived at. And then, in my view, even your undirected, which we don't support, you would just have a task that isn't assigned to someone, right? So there's a task for fulfillment, but there's no owner of the task, right? It's just hanging. And then when the patient arrives, they present the barcode, it finds the task, and it now assigns the task to the provider that the patient's arrived at. So,
sorry, Angus, when you say you don't support, you don't like or you won't support?
Sonic Healthcare doesn't support undirected orders as a business, not as a technical. It's not capable, but as a policy, as a policy position, as a position.
But of course, the lab wouldn't know the difference, right? They wouldn't know if it was directed or undirected, because if a patient rocks up at a Sonic lab and goes, "Look, I've got this barcode, go and process this for me," Angus is not going to know whether that, other than the form on the piece of paper, he won't know whether it was undirected or directed. He'll just go, "Give me this," and you go, "There you go," and now it's just like it was directed. So it's actually not an issue for the fulfiller, it's actually an issue for the placer.
Technically, it's completely possible and capable, David. It's Sonic Healthcare doesn't support the position of undirected orders.
Yeah, but that's
an
not a
interesting
spec problem.
discussion with government.
That's a high. It's not a technical discussion. That's a higher level discussion.
Yeah. Tell me that. Did you want to weigh in?
Thanks, Brad. I have two questions here. I have raised few on the board on the forum as well. First thing, I don't see a clear requirement of saying task.identify must be equal to service.requisition. If we are saying that that's the only way of querying, we can still query when the patient arrives with the barcode that is a service.requisition. You can fetch the task, saying go fetch the task where focus.requisition equals to the number barcode. So there's still a way you fetch the information. It's only are we permitting that the QR code we should be available to publicly to everywhere before the patient is actually going to the concerned filler. Second is Angus does mention few interactions with respect to saying we fillers want to fetch the list of tasks that includes a service request, but that differ based on the requirement or use cases what fillers want to do with that information before the patient arrives to them. Because once the patient arrives, that is just an instance operation where you just go and fetch one particular order, not the list of orders, right? And before the patient arrives, if you're looking for a list of orders to come, that doesn't comprise that you need to have the order information, or you just want to have the information of what orders, number of orders, or what orders has been arrived to or has been generated for us. Do you really want to see into those orders? Or I think that will come to the interaction between repositories and the fillers, what level of information they want to see beforehand, and should or shouldn't be the part of the spec, eRequesting spec.
Cool. Thanks, Torin. Ken?
Just on this sort of fluidity of the filler, the signed filler, I'll describe you a situation which is a medico-legal situation. So a doctor requests a test for a heart attack, a troponin test, urgently to a filler. The patient hasn't presented for that test. They may have collapsed at home. Who is responsible for finding the patient who had a life-threatening test not fulfilled? It tends to be the filler. And our college has a position that the pathologist who that order was directed to should be able to search for unfilled for requests for urgent tests. So we do need to be able to search tests which are directed to us, because we can't have the whole of the pathology system responsible for every urgent patient. It's really the requester and the directed filler.
Actually, I think that's a really interesting requirement in terms of urgent requests. I think that would be really, we should work through that with tasks.
Yep.
And priorities and understand that. Especially, I don't know, yeah, I assume they would have to be directed if they're urgent. So that, again, that might lead to some rules that we want to think about, or at least some guidance. Yeah, that's good. Thanks, Ken.
I wanted to comment on Tally's thing. So I think, so I don't know if your question, Tally, does the task group identifier have to be equal to the service request requisition? And it's a fair question. And I think for a long time we've sort of thought, oh, they just are. I know when I developed my system, I had to struggle with this. And I remember developing it to say, well, they don't, but that's not to say they shouldn't, because the grouping of the tasks and the barcode the patient has, that gets you to a task. Does the service request grouping identifier have to be the same thing? It technically doesn't have to. It's kind of nice that if you align them all up, but I certainly built my system to say this group identifier and task groups the tasks, and I'm expected to find a set of service requests which have a group identifier that isn't necessarily the same identifier, but it groups all the service requests, right? And so I think I'd like to lead towards they are the same, but it doesn't have to be the same. I don't know if that's actually what you're asking.
I think that's good.
How it couldn't.
You don't understand how it couldn't, or you don't?
If you have references, you don't need to. Right.
It doesn't have to be, but it kind of makes sense that it is.
Yeah, it does make sense. I think though, I'm going to set this discussion aside because we will have this discussion in terms of task and other things. So maybe just to round this out and move along. So with these ones, I'm hearing nobody has real need or desire to have this set of interactions here. So I think I won't even ask for a vote. I think we'll just propose that I'll just say by consensus, we won't address this at this point. So any objections to that?
No, I agree. We're putting this in ice until we get to task.
Yeah, cool. All right. So thanks, Chris. We might move on 2 slides. So we have done filler. Okay, so that's the interaction we're going to have for filler. So we are now on to rounding out patient access client and the requirements there. So this is where we had considered this stuff. I think, Chris, we should probably delete the first sub bullet point there again, because that one was something we didn't have on our server. So this is now the ability for a patient access client to do searching by ID or by requisition identifier. So that's already been reflected on the server as a capability. So I think unless there's any great objection, I would like to move that we accept these searches as being available to the patient access actor.
Thanks, Brett. Would anybody like to second that?
Happy to accept, second. Sorry, Jenny Whale, losing her voice.
Jenny.
Okay, should see a vote up on your screen now if you would like to vote affirmative, negative, or abstain on the current proposal for patient access. We'll just give that one a few more seconds, let everybody get their votes in, and we'll close that one off in 3, 2, 1. And that one has been passed. Thank you.
Amazing. All right, so I think congratulations
just before
everyone.
you do that, Brett, can I just have the numbers, please, Chris?
Oh.
Yep, it's 33 for, 14 abstained, no negative.
Thank you.
Thanks for your diligence, Chris. Cool. So as I say, thanks to everyone. That that's all the decisions we're going to make before the ballot is published. So yeah, really appreciate the effort that's gone into getting all of that squared away to this level. So we'll be incorporating these decisions into the IG before publication. And I think I think we've got some things sorted out so far. So I think we've introduced actors, we've got capability statements, we've got something to work with around service request, and I think obviously now we will be moving on to doing task and other things beyond that. But I think we've kind of got a working model around service requests. So I think that's a fair achievement for a draft. And we really, I think it's really important now that we go through what is published and point at any deficiencies or improvements that could get made around that content. So yeah, and obviously now too we have a set of specs that we can do some, have some basis of doing Connecticon work that's scoped in some way. So I think this has all been very good, and it also helps us look at testing frameworks and other things that we can start to look at in terms of being able to support testing in different ways. So very much appreciated to get through that, and we can probably move on.
Brilliant. Thanks, Brett, and thanks for all the sessions you've run in the last few weeks, getting all of those items through. All right, so I think we're now going to go to an eRequesting IG walkthrough.
I'm going to do that too.
You're doing this one as well? All right, brilliant.
I think so.
Would you like to pilot for this one?
Yeah, I think I will. I'll take over. Get this setting. All right. So hopefully you can see an eRequesting IG. Let's get the homepage. How about that? Yeah, cool. Is that coming through okay?
Yes, we can see it, Brett.
That's good. So I'm just going to do a real quick run through, just to point at the bits. And obviously this is we'll be doing an actual. We'll add these last updates and be publishing an official version. So there'll be a link for that will come out as part of the ballot activity. But yeah, this is just to point at the parts that are there now. The sort of scope of what we're seeing here is pretty much covering all the kind of artifacts we expect to exist, but there'll be more detail added obviously with the decisions today. So we'll just go through that at the moment. So I'm just going to go through page by page and just point at things. So we have our introductory page. So again, there's it's worth noting there are these highlighted notes throughout the spec, which are kind of highlighting specific questions and specific kind of activity as well. So if you see notes that usually they're marked as STU notes, which have questions in them, they might be attached to JIRA tickets or otherwise, and what we're looking is actually looking for specific feedback around things. So if you see any of those, that's a worthwhile exercise just to consider those things and put your 2 cents in as part of the ballot process in the comment. But obviously anything you see that you think is a problem, typos, whatever you think is an issue with the content, we particularly like typos and grammar, at one level, but also is the information sufficient? Is the information actually helping you in understanding, or is there some, does more information need to be there? Whenever you do those kinds of comments about the actual informative content, it's really appreciated if you can put a suggestion as to what it should be. It's much more likely to get attention if you say it should say something about this or something about that. That's actually much more helpful, and if you draft the words, we will be very appreciative. So yeah, that's just good form in terms of getting the outcome that you want from the issue that you're raising. Yeah, so that's for the more wordy parts of the spec. So we have essentially sort of some background material on automated content, some our definitions for actors, some details, basically an overview on the start page. We do have a conformance page which is empty. That will be something I think we have to probably think about content there, but we will, I think at the moment that will remain empty. But if there is some general guidance content in there provided, I think it would be good if people could look at that. We do have a general guidance page which has a bunch of material just about how to do certain things. I expect there'll be additions that people want to have. So I think that would be good to look at. We've got our eRequesting mapping. We've already agreed today to update this with some more content, so I think that will also come through. We've got some general positioning in terms of relationship to other IGs. This is content similar to what's done in AU Core. It kind of places this spec with respect to others. Yeah, it's good if you could run through that and see if there's anything there that's an issue. We have a standard page on our variance statement, which is a technical page about any variance in terms of conformance, compliance with AU Base and AU Core. At the moment, we don't have any differences, so there's not much to see here. So we don't expect there to be any problem. And we've defined, it's basically highlighting we've got a service request profile that's not really covered in AU Core or AU Base. Future, there's some timeline stuff there. So that's context again. So I guess that's more informative anyway. So if there's anything there that would be interesting to talk about, that's good. We've got our use cases here, which are the ones that were originally worked on as part of the use case updates, use case sort of development. So I think not much has changed there in terms of that content, but it might be good to think about how to capture, maybe look at this in terms of CDI and maybe look at it in terms of actors specifically and things like that. So I think it'd be good to get some feedback on maybe how to improve that page to be a little more linked to the spec in different ways. And we're into our important parts, which are the normative parts of the spec, which are where our profiles are. We've got essentially our generic profile and our specific domain specific profiles. So yeah, it would be good to go through this material. We would like people to sort of check they're getting the outcome they think they're getting from the discussion that we've had in terms of the constraints being added, and also these obligations that have been added and the days. So making sure that that's making sense in terms of what is there. If you think there needs to be more description and more information around these things, I think that would be, it'd be great if you could advise on that. But yeah, hopefully this, basically we want people to go through, see if there's any real issues with what we've done already. So I think too, I think it's good to rethink about the outcome here and say, is this the outcome I really want to have, and actually comment on that. Is there anything we missed that we should be adding in? And also, do you see a problem of a previous decision that we've made? So basically, all things that are balloted votes that are there need to be considered. This is a draft for comment, so really it's a lot looser than going to a working standard. So really, we're trying to elicit as much feedback as possible and try and get the best quality outcome on every single element that we've defined. And so yeah, so if you think there's an issue, it's a good time to raise it, and or you see any problem with the path that we're taking at the moment. So we've got our generic one and also our specific ones, which have brought in our specific terminology and things like that. So that's all something that now, we've got detail here. So this is essentially some covering all the scope of the draft material we kind of expect to have.
Brett, just on that, Brett, I just want to walk through the way that that implementation has done that coding now about the preferred binding and the additional binding. Just using that imaging request would be good, just to walk people through how that's been implemented from our decision a few weeks ago.
So is that
does that have now have a value set? Does it? Like you just
So yeah, if it just got merged in yesterday. So if you look there, that the actual preferred binding is the RANSA radiology referral set, which is part of the IG. So that's the draft one that's been pulled in and created within the IG. And then we have the additional binding, which is the imaging procedure.
Which is the
and that's also
SNOMED
preferred.
set.
Yeah. So that's the approach. That's how that's been implemented from our decision the other day. And we have similar on pathology as well, except for the imaging one, the value set is inside the IG. So for the moment, that's why we've put a draft in there as part of the IG.
Yeah, that's awesome, Michael. So that's just that's not like a final version of that that terminology. So so it's being worked on in the spec. Eventually, it will end up in NCTS.
What's under imaging procedure? So you got the
That's,
preferred RANSCA at the top, and then what's in there?
Yeah, that's the broader health. That's the broader SNOMED set. So that's where we're saying.
Use the SNOMED term, but not
use the SNOMED term.
Use any imaging SNOMED term that may not be in the RANSCA one.
Yeah, exactly. So these are things that are in the broader this ref set that's the broader set. So we really do want to use the RANSCA set as the primary way of requesting, but in failing that, you can use this.
What does that mean for body site?
Well, body site,
given the other set includes pre-coordinated body site, but this doesn't.
I think we're
so we still have body site as must support. So if you have it, you still. But that's I think something we should talk about and potentially connect on that is that exactly that when body site is used.
Yeah, I think there's a case that you use body site when you think you need to use body site. So it's so I expect if you're doing multi-box selection and everything's in parts, you'll have a body site. If you're doing a pre-coordinated code, you may not have a body site, right? So it's but we expect that I think there's work to do around how you use it. Yeah,
it's also useful where there's a code missing from the RANSCA set, which industry has gone, you're missing this code, right? And RANSCA goes, okay, SNOMED allocates a new code, but it's not in the current RANSCA value set. That's going to take another 6 months. You can still put it in as a SNOMED term, and then eventually one day it'll become a RANSCA term, and then you just automatically are doing the right thing.
Yeah.
And then all the others are going to be like somewhere between SNOMED or free text, aren't they?
Yeah, and I think
that's where we support so this then supports the local code as the next, like it's not there, but it's part of, because we're not constrained because they're only preferred bindings. And then you can just use text as all else fails.
Yeah, exactly. And I think it's also, we probably need to get to the point where we can write a guidance page to say, this is what you should do in these scenarios, right? And actually say, if you have this in RANSCA, use that. If you have, the next step would be this, next step would be that.
We're not going to put in that we had that diagram sort of showing the arrows. Are we going to put that in the IG? Is that going too far?
Could you, Ballot, if you think that's worthwhile? Because I think there's a like in AU Core, we have some more detailed body site usage guidance around using body site for procedure and condition, where we go through a set of scenarios that are applicable. And, you know, I think we might need to head towards having that similar kind of more detailed usage guidance as to say this is what we expect, which basically lays out options. But I think that's maybe where you could include a diagram. But I would say ballot what you think should be there.
Agree. What here says that I can use my own local code? It's kind of just implied, is it? Like it's not spelt out, is it?
Well, it just says coding.
Dot point 3.
Yeah.
Dot point 2, sorry.
Coding is preferred. So it's, but you could someone would read that and say, oh, SNOMED coding is preferred over supplying free text only, because you've told me about the Ransker coding, you've told me about the using any SNOMED from the imaging procedure, and then you've just said coding is preferred, but you've
Valid
kind of
comment,
framed them.
Angus.
You've framed
Valid
them.
comment, Angus.
Valid comment,
No worries.
Angus.
Okay,
Yep.
will do.
Yep. Yeah, I get. Yeah, true. Put the word. Send the words that you think should be there.
Yeah.
But yeah, I don't disagree. Cool. And also, obviously now, yeah, we've added these, as well as our profiles, we've got detail about all of the terminology that we're using throughout this spec, including external Fire-based, NCTS-based terminology, and the ones also defined AE-based and also in eRequesting it now with the Ransker set that's in here. So yeah, it would be good to have a perusal and see if you think that makes sense. We've also now got our actor definitions in, which we had last time, but we've got details on each of the actors. You know, obviously, there's not a lot of detail here, so I think if we wanted to flesh these out further, that we probably take suggestions as to how we might do that. But these were the agreed words, and that we've got that far. We've also now got the capability statements related to our interactions discussions explicitly. I think for the people that are really into this stuff, there's another layer of more technical detail that probably needs to be addressed. So I think certainly if you're interested in more than some of the specifics around you know, support, you know, things like XML and JSON support, are we going to ask for both? Right? So or one as mandatory or whatever, right? So there's a few questions there that sort of need to come up and probably be explained. So yeah, it's worth going through this for, you know, in terms of the scope. We should be reflecting the interactions discussion we've had today in here as well. So this will cover off the particular you know, usages that we've got. So yeah, so that's essentially the definition of the scope of the actors and what they do, you know, are attached to this. So it's yeah, we'll have to. That would be good to review that, see if there's more description needed or more. You think there's anything there that's not meshing up with what we've decided. That's about it. We do have, there are some examples too, and like if you can think of some other examples to add, we take suggestions as well, but obviously there's example content, so it's worth seeing if they're doing the job in terms of explaining things well. And the rest is all just artifact-based stuff. So this is like standard downloads, which is kind of interesting if you want to get access to bits and pieces, and our obligatory licensing statement, which is our HL7 Australia licensing statement, which we will take comments on, but this group won't solve it. That'll get pushed up to the file worker if there's an issue with that. So that's the quick walkthrough.
Can I ask about the directory of published versions is a 404? Is that because we have not
haven't published?
Because this is still the beta 1, right? Yeah.
Yeah. As soon as we publish that, there's a history page that normally gets attached to all IGs. Once we've got our first version, we'll have a history page generated. We'll have a specific version, which is our ballot version, and we'll have our current build referenced as well. Yeah, at the moment, we haven't got that because we haven't done a snapshot publication as yet. So yeah, so we should have next week. We should have one, right? So yeah, again, like yeah, all of this stuff too, I guess, is if you see anything that's not right in terms of something's missing, or that, you know, expecting the history page doesn't look right or whatever, like all of that's good feedback. We we kind of with this spec, we're really looking to gather as many, like trying to find the problems and issues and improvements that we can apply. This is not really about, nobody expects this to be approved for use, right? In terms of like, this is not a working standard at the end of this first draft for comment process. So we obviously haven't finished is one thing, but also I think what we're trying to do is just get the content that we have got up to a better level, make sure it's, you know, it's reflecting all the things we've decided and having, you know, a good set of information that's out there. Yeah, I think it's.
If I wanted to provide comment about something I find, how do I do that, Brett?
Oh, that's a very good question. Thank you for asking. There is a propose a change link at the bottom of every page. So if you hit that, you'll end up at eventually, when it's not broken. There we go. So we'll end up in the HL7 Jira system. You need to log in to be able to create an issue, and we will be running some sessions about how to vote as part of our process. There is some material already, which is if we are looking at the ballot reference material. So I'll bring that up so we can quickly.
Just on that, anyone can raise an issue. You don't have to be voting to raise an issue. Anyone can raise an issue.
True. If you're not able to sign up for ballot because you're not an HL7 Australia member, or just are otherwise unregistered, you can raise issues, and you can do that at any time. So you can do that today if you want to, right? So that's definitely always a possibility. The thing with a ballot is every balloted issue has to be resolved by the group as part of a reconciliation process, whereas the other issues are more just triaged and handled as we go along. In some ways, it's, you know, the ballot is a good way to make a formal feedback statement and actually, you know, say how you have a position against the spec. But issues are taken at any time. So as part of this valid announcement, so this was referred to for the message that went out with the sign up messages. There's all the details about signing up on this page. I'll probably get that in the chat, because this is where we do things. You know, as well as that, there's some material here. There's a guidance page which is basically covers how to once you are signed up and the ballot is open, how to do things. So there's some videos on how to drive the system in Jira to create a ballot issue, how to create an issue, and go through that process. So there's a quick video which shows just like the basics of pressing the buttons to get an issue up, and there's a longer session that was run, which was just a more detailed walkthrough with some questions and answers as well recorded there. So there's that's available, you know, as some recordings there, and there's also some wordy versions of that as well if you just want to look at one particular thing, but shows you kind of how to action votes and do things with the voting. So we also expect to run a session specifically for voters to be able to, which I think an invitation went out to members. I think it's on the 16th of August. We're going to do like a Q&A ballot voting session. So I haven't got that link, but it's I think we'll maybe circulate that around as well on the TDG lists, to let people know that that's there. Cool. I think that's probably enough from me.
Brett, what was the top of this page? I was trying to find it.
Oh, sorry, you're trying to find this one?
Yeah, the balloting guidance page you're on.
Oh, balloting guidance page. So it's, yeah, there's a link there. Okay. Yeah. If you're looking for this stuff, this is the HL7 Australia space, not the fire work group space.
That's what was tripping. Yep.
Yeah, and there's a governance section which has all the ballot announcements and process stuff, which includes some guidance on balloting, how to do various things in here, plus any rules that we have around content and material. So yeah, but definitely like the ballot announcements is I'll try and make sure that the ballot announcements have all the details and links to things that you need to do. So there's like how to be a member, how to sign up to the ballot, and there's also some stuff on voting. The artifacts, when they're available, there's links to them here, but there'll also be email correspondence to everyone signed up. I think on around the 5th, I'll probably send out. I have to do manual confirmations so everyone's signed up. So I'll probably send a mail out to everyone sort of signed up. I might do it a couple of days out from the closure of the ballot to make sure that if you think you're signed up, you're actually signed up. And I'll probably send out something else out to the TDG groups as well in case you've missed that. So yeah. So if you think you've signed up and you don't get an email saying yes, you've definitely signed up, yeah, please let me know and we'll check what's happened. But yeah, at the moment there seems to be signups happening. We've got pretty good numbers, so I think that's positive. And yeah, and I think hopefully we'll get a good cycle done, and we'll be considering issues pretty quickly after the ballot opens. The co-chairs, we can actually start triaging issues and start organising what we're getting back immediately once they start coming in. So the co-chairs will be sort of doing that job and then start bringing things to the group, as that makes sense. Anyway, so that is about all the content, I think. So I might leave it there.
Great, thanks, Brett. I'm not going to turn my video back on because my camera's crashed, but I am going to show you what's coming up. This is what we have happening in August. So Monday the 5th of August, the eRequesting R1 ballot for comment is published. There'd normally be a meeting on Tuesday the 6th. However, that meeting has been cancelled due to the AUeReqDI HIC conference being on at the same time and a significant number of people being at that event. The next event that we'll see you at will be the eRequesting track at the kickoff, at the Connectathon on Friday the 9th of August in Brisbane. The next actual eRequesting TDG.
Sorry,
meeting.
Chris, that one's the kickoff meeting for the Connectathon. So that's the next Friday, which is if you're registered to go to the Connectathon and you're interested in the eRequesting track, then that's the kickoff meeting to run through that next Friday. Yeah.
Yep. Sorry. Thanks for the correction. Yeah. Kickoff meeting for the track at the Connectathon is Friday the 9th of August. The next eRequesting meeting is the 15th of August. And then there are the 3 days in Brisbane, 20th to the 23rd of August.
And the 20th is a hybrid. So it's an in-person event, but the TDG will also be run as a hybrid. So you'll be able to join remotely to that if you can't attend on the day.
Great.
And I think, Michael, that's on another link, isn't it, for the day?
Yes, it will be.
Other technology, yeah, which will have to go out, yeah.
That's right. I'm not quite sure exactly what the details are at the moment, but yes, it won't be the standard TDG link because I think it may be Teams.
I think you're right. Yeah, I think we're on the Telstra infrastructure with Teams built into the room, so there'll be a link sent out for that. Yeah.
All right. So that's it for today. We'll finish up 10 minutes early. Thank you everyone for your time, and we will see you in the next couple of weeks.
Thanks all.
Thanks, Tim.
Thank you.
Thanks.
Thank you.